Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for the very first episode of ESG's brand new webinar series, Customer Success Unlocked. My name is Marley Wagner. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Services here at ESG, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar titled Change Management for Customer Success. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be made available to all of you within 24 hours of the webinar. Throughout today's session, you are absolutely more than welcome to submit questions via the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as possible, both throughout the presentation as well as during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Peter Armaly. Peter is a senior level customer success and marketing professional, with extensive experience working with clients of both SaaS and on-premise customer engagement models. He is the current head of enablement and voice of the customer programs and an industry advisor for Oracle North America Customer Success. Peter, thank you so very much for being with us today. I am so excited to have you as our very first webinar guest.
Thank you, Marley, and hello, everybody. And Marley, I have to congratulate you and the others, members of ESG, for the announcement that today your results were pretty impressive.
Thank you. Yes, we another great quarter on the books, so we're excited to. I guess we're already more than halfway through the first month of Q3, but excited to continue the trajectory in Q3. And have you here with us today. So I know we're going to talk about change and change management and customer success. And for everyone out there listening, we're going to break our conversation into kind of two sections today. So Peter, I know you have a slide I think you wanted to pull up to kind of talk about the two different concepts that we're going to cover. Sure thing.
Yeah, everybody. Marley and I talked about this, and we thought it made sense to just break these because we're talking about change management. It's a huge topic, of course, especially for customer success, which is on the forefront of change for customers, but also for your own employer, your company you work at. So I thought we would break it into two sections. The first one being organizational. And, the way I look at it, I can boil it down to, in my mind, and I should probably just kind of highlight a little bit of my experience. I've been in customer success for probably about 15 years, a variety of roles, both as an individual contributor, more at the architectural level, but working with clients, large clients, and then, management of teams, building teams, directing organizations. I've moved into a role as the lead researcher for customer success at TSAA a number of years ago. And then I moved over to Oracle because I was invited to join their effort to transform customer success within the company. And I've been here for, it'll be 5 years in 2 weeks, actually.
And so early anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a great ride. Lots of change, of course. And so that my point is, I've been through a lot. I've seen a lot. I've worked with a lot of customers, and I feel like I can boil down organizational challenges into, where is it? There. These kind of three statements, I would say. A weak understanding of the CS mission across the organization due to misalignment between customer success and the other groups. And sometimes it's, this is a little provocative. Sometimes I feel it's intentional. And what I mean by that is that other groups will assign the definition of customer success if customer success isn't really strong in staking a claim there. So that's a huge challenge if you're in that environment where everyone else is defining the role for you. That's really risky, I would say. Second one is a vacuum in awareness of customer success. And that's very common, meaning that a lot of groups don't really know what customer success is meant to do and what its vision is and what its purpose is and what the elements of the service are. And I hate to say this, but it's often due to just a really poor communication strategy by customer success. And so I always challenge leaders to really step it up and get really great at messaging. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that kind of would look like. And finally, this is probably the most complicated aspect that I see. It's not often brought up, but I feel like it is a challenge that the common business model of our economies, which is to say, especially in high tech, which, license-based sales, salespeople were kind of the prominent role in the company. Most of the time they still are. And yet the subscription economy has flipped that around, of course. And this is really, it's become a cliche, but it's important to point out that because of cloud and because of the subscription economy, really the impetus now is on the back end, on the post-sales side, to drive a big share of the revenue now. And it's going to just continually increase. That's just the way the economy is going to work. And yet, I feel like there's a lot of companies that are still operating with those effects or with this kind of approach of before, which is to say, we're going to compensate our salespeople in a big way to just sell. And there's a lot of difficulties there when you get kind of bad sales and kind of quote unquote bad customers for customer success. And there's not a lot of great handoffs of information and a seamless flow of process. And so that's what I see as in terms of an organizational kind of challenges is those three things. And it's just, it can go on and on. And Marley, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the details of those things.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to kind of think about it and break it down in this way, right? I think a lot of customer success organizations and leaders can get stuck in this, well, it's just all hard and there are challenges all around me. And so I'm not going to worry about defining them. I'm just going to get right to getting around them, right? Yeah. So I think the fact that you want to start with saying, okay, what are the sort of categories of these challenges that CS leaders could be facing? I think that's really important to start there. So with that foundation in mind, thinking forward, why do you think customer success struggles with some of these factors, like delivering, their own mission towards helping their customers achieve desired business outcomes?
Sure, I'm going to stop sharing for now and just talk with you about this. So why is it a struggle? I feel like for those challenges, but fundamentally it's because I feel like customer success needs to step up and really start proving its worth. And to do that, and by doing that, then they'll have legitimacy to raise their hand and say, we want to accept more responsibility for the company revenue. And only when they do that, I believe, will they have the credibility and the same kind of level of respect that sales leaders do, marketing leaders do, product leaders do with the C-suite. Until that's really tackled, I think customer success will always struggle to really be seen as this vital mission that we all believe it is. Our customers believe it is. But too often, the senior executives who are more plugged into the revenue attainment, goals, of course, that makes sense. They're running the company. Do not see customer success as strategic as maybe we do, or even our customers do. And so I think we need to figure out what do we need to do to be able to kind of, with confidence, raise our hand and say, okay, we're ready, and we want to accept more revenue responsibility. So until then, we're going to really struggle to get out of this trap of being seen as, well, you're just going to help customers. You're just going to help, and you're going to take our orders.
Yeah, and I think that's a trap, customer success teams can really get stuck in, right? Yeah. I think, again, it's all about the customer and that's where we're focused. And so I think sometimes entire departments can struggle to push all that messaging upwards, right? To draw those correlations between CS and revenue, to say like, hey, look at me, I'm raising my hand, I want a seat at the table. And then once we get it, like what happens? What do we do with it? Do you think that we should see that as a flaw in the customer success business model, or should we think about it a different way?
No, I don't see it as a flaw per se. Not in its essence. I think customer success is on the right track. By and large, our community is excited about the core mission of customer success. I mean, really, how can you argue against? We want to be the organization that's going to drive successful outcomes for our customer, with the logic being, if those are achieved, then that's going to benefit us and the company, and everyone's going to be the proverbial win-win. I mean, that's really just, it's 100%, everyone can agree on that. So that's not a flaw. So I think that's, it's actually a very powerful model in that sense. But what gets into trouble is if, you don't factor in what are all the elements it's going to take to actually do that, to execute on that core mission of driving successful outcomes for customers. It sounds very easy on paper, but if and maybe this is true, I think it's generally true that the larger your company is, the more complicated it becomes. And the larger your customer base is, and the more products you have, all these things are complicating factors, and they can really influence your ability to kind of execute well against that core mission. And so that's where the model can break down. And that's where maybe so the flaw, I would say, to summarize this, the flaw might be that if you're not factoring those complicating factors in, then that can be really dangerous.
Agreed. We just had a really great question from one of our attendees come through that I want to ask you right now. So this question is around customer success revenue responsibility. So talk about kind of what streams that can look like and how to prioritize those streams in a SaaS model, right? This question is, asking, how do we pick renewals, upsells, expansions? We can't take them all, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I recommend, and this is what we do too, and most companies I speak with follow this approach, is probably I don't want to say easy, but probably the more logical revenue kind of lever to pull first for customer success is retention. And it makes 100% sense. It's because you're already working with the customers, you've got a relationship with the customers. Who better to actually understand what's the propensity of this customer to renew? And you should know that well in advance. I mean, if they're having challenges, you should know what those challenges are, whether you're going to be able to kind of for them to overcome the challenges enough to where they feel like, okay, you're a good partner, you're demonstrating the right kind of commitment with us, we want to bet again on you. And so retention is just a logical, in my mind, it's a logical flow of growth of the customer success kind of practice. Now, but I wouldn't stop there. I think I would get really good at that to the point where I don't necessarily recommend you actually own the actual contract piece of that. Mm-hmm. I believe you need to be involved in the actual drive of the renewal conversations, be involved there, be instrumental in getting that customer to make that decision. In other words, make it clear to the senior executives that you say you want to be involved in revenue and you're going to take over, be involved in retention. Make it clear that you're actually having an impact there. If it's very clear to them, then you can refine your ability to kind of get better at that through data, better kind of lead kind of analysis, and understand what are the steps you're going to take on a repeated way to drive your customers into a higher kind of level of retention at scale. And then if you get good at that, I think the sky's the limit. You actually should look at taking some responsibility for expansion conversations and cross-sell. I think it makes perfect sense because, again, same logic holds that if you have a relationship with customers and you've, let's say, already gone through a renewal, or you're at that period of renewal and they are successful, why wouldn't you want to show your strong partnership with them and your faith in your product and your vendor, the company you're working for, to say, we are the right partner for you. I understand your growth goals. And I know we can help you achieve those things. And that would not be a tough conversation, I don't think, for CSM who's been, well aware of the customer's needs and goals and has been managing those things all along.
I agree. It's funny. We always say, so when thinking about customer success and renewals, yes, there's a contract process involved in a renewals conversation, right? But contract notwithstanding, a renewal should really just be a result if customer success is functioning the way it should be, right? If everything's working in your customer success organization, that should naturally lead to a renewal. And to your point, it should be easy to talk about that and have those conversations.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think that's a really natural place to start.
There shouldn't be really any friction if you actually are genuinely working with the customer all along and according to plan. And they are engaged with you. It's only when either side is kind of distant from the relationship that then the trouble might happen, because then you have to play a lot of catch up and try to understand what's going on. And that's not a good recipe for success.
Absolutely. Agreed. Okay. So I know we went off track a tiny bit there, but coming back to those kind of operational challenges that we see most commonly, how do you think about improving those things, right? What should customer success leaders be thinking about if they want to make things better in a way that really makes a difference?
Sure. So, I think we can identify that the biggest challenge really is, how does customer success piece together all the elements it needs to drive its strategy for customers? And more often than not, they can't do it alone. There's too many pieces of the puzzle that are held by other organizations. And usually it's in the form of data or information. Sometimes it can actually be kind of tools and tasks. For example, customer success might lean on marketing to help them, execute part of their model. And so they rely on them. But usually in terms of sales, it's about information and leveraging what they already know about the customer. And so there's this needs to be an established kind of process for tapping into that, presenting yourself as a CSM as more of a peer to the salesperson, so they see you as part of a partnership working the accounts. Now, what I recommend is you don't do this in an ad hoc manner. I think this needs to be kind of a leader to leader approach. The only way this will actually operate at scale is if you kind of remove the personalities. Just because you have some rock star CSMs and who are good at having relationships with particular salespeople and they hit it out of the park and great, and they go to club and everything and all that wonderful stuff, that's not good for your company overall. I mean, you actually have to look at it as, how are we going to do this for all of our accounts in theory? And so that's why I say it needs to be leader to leader, actually executive to executive, to agree, we want this outcome where data flows naturally and seamlessly between our salespeople to our post-sales people. It's not simple, but that's a good goal. And I think that needs to be kind of really established and agreed to, and then implemented in some form or manner. If it doesn't take place, you always fall back to there's gaps in data. You're always kind of playing catch up. You're trying to contact people who might know the information. It's better to get ahead of the problem and really establish that flow of an agreement to have a flow of information. And on the sales side, the criticism is often, well, the salespeople are just not inputting the data. There are levers that sales executives can pull to make sure those salespeople do put the data into the CRM. And I would encourage sales leaders to do that, because they need to understand what the outcome is, especially again in the subscription economy where the company's revenue in the future is mostly going to be on the post-sale side. So it's to their benefit if they get this established early. And so, the same philosophy I would say would follow for other organizations. Support, these leaders need to agree, what does each side need? Mm-hmm. And I think I want to make that point that customer success, we're always saying, well, we need this, we need this, we need this. Sometimes these organizations need you. And so just keep that in mind. You're not going there empty-handed. You have information too. And I would say use that, present it as kind of not a bargaining chip, but just say, I have a gift for you, but I need this from you too. And so I would say use data, use customer intel as a way to kind of break down walls and kind of start agreeing that it's beneficial if we actually share information.
Yes, I love that. I think we forget that, right? I think customer success, like you said, so often is like, oh, I really need this, I really need the sales reps to put this information into the CRM, or I really need support to tell me, what topics they're getting a lot of tickets about so we can be more proactive or whatever. It's not just things that CS needs from them. There's so much data the customer success gathers that can be beneficial to all these orgs. So it is a two-way street. I think that's super important. Yeah. You started to talk about this a little bit, Peter, but can you talk more about what those conversations should look like? Those leader to leader, peer to peer conversations.
Sure.
What should they talk about? How should they
start? I mean, it's not an easy task. I know I've said this a few times already in 21 minutes, but customer success is never easy, and it's not easy for leaders to make inroads here. But I feel like if they get this right, this could make a huge improvement for the prospects of customer success to be a very kind of viable, strategic entity for a company. And what I mean by that is I think that leaders have to understand a big part of their role isn't just to lead the team of CSMs. A big part of their role is actually evangelizing inside the company about customer success. You don't want to just leave it to your VP of customer success. All leaders in customer success, and I would even argue CSMs should take the opportunity when they can to advance, a message about customer success with whoever they're talking with, if it's appropriate. So if you're talking about leaders, though, there should be some sort of a presentation or standard kind of messaging they would leverage. Arrange meetings with peer management teams in sales, in marketing, in support. So usually support is much more aware of customer success because of the symbiotic relationship there. But sales and marketing don't have that kind of awareness necessarily. It varies.
And even product sometimes too.
Yeah, I always forget about product, but that's so critical. I'm glad you mentioned that. Absolutely. Product needs to know what the value is of customer success for the company, for the customer, and for them as product leaders. I mean, if I'm a product leader, why wouldn't I want to be tapped into in a programmatic way, not just an ad hoc way, but a programmatic way with people who are actually talking to the customer, working with the customer, working through a plan to drive them to achieve milestones with the products I created.
Yes.
I mean, it would just be a treasure trove of information for me to help improve my product. So I would say, get the messaging down pat, be proactive, get out there, schedule meetings, get in front of people and start presenting, raise that, educate them, raise awareness, do it in a non-adversarial way. Going back to bearing gifts, I think you can remind people or let them know this isn't a one-way kind of exchange. We have stuff we believe will be really beneficial to you. Let's talk, let's share information about each other. And so once you understand what we're all about, I think you'll want to really engage us in a bigger way.
So true. And a lot of that is really focused on data, right? Customer success is constantly gathering data. So much of that data can go back to other orgs within the broader company. So let's talk about something I know you and I could both just kind of nerd out on for a while. But let's talk about data and analytics and reporting and how that all ties into this conversation.
Yeah, a big part of my job is data, of course, because on the internal side of it, running enablement, I have to understand what the skills requirements are. It's like talking to leaders all the time, understanding what they need in their teams, as they see what their customer community needs. And so they're trying to match their people with the needs of the customers. And I'm trying to match our curriculum, which is always evolving, and trying to kind of refine it so that it's hitting the mark of creating the right kind of quote unquote CSM. We're building a CSM that's going to match the market. So that's really at its core all about data, trying to measure stuff and trying to correlate and match and do pattern matching and all that kind of stuff. And then externally, because I'm involved in the voice of the customer, that's huge, right? So It's all about data. And we're always trying to make it more and more sophisticated. It's not just about NPS and surveys. It's actually, we're getting really involved with more of our marketing kind of practices and incorporating that kind of science to really complete a bigger picture, a more accurate picture of what our customers are perceiving, what they're experiencing with our products, with our service, and then what they're perceiving too, which is kind of different, right? Experiencing and perceptions are a little different. So we try to kind of create those pictures, and so that I can create a much more robust and rich view of our customers that we can then share back to the product teams. They're excited that there's this entity that's going to be responsible for this. And of course, sales, when they're aware of this, they're super excited, because then they start thinking about expansion possibilities, and not just expansion, but taking what we're learning and we're collecting customer stories and putting them into a hub and all that kind of stuff that they can tap into if they've got new logos, right? And start sharing information about existing customers. So data is so vital for customer success, and it's inescapable that, you know, it's been true for some time, but it's 100% true going forward that CSMs need to be data-minded, data-driven, data-minded. And so those two different things, right? Data-driven means the work you do is driven by data kind of actions founded in data. But data-minded means you should always be thinking that way too. We don't want you robotic, but we want you to think, is this measurable? And is this way, if it's measurable, we can probably repeat it in a much easier way. And then you can help out the designers of the service to kind of figure out a better way to refine the elements of the service model.
Yes, I love that. Another audience question I'm going to insert right here because I think it's perfect timing. How do you keep all of this data organized?
How do we organize it?
How do we keep all of this data we're talking about organized? Where do we put it? What do we do with it? How do we share it?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. Yeah, obviously it varies based on company, and there's no way around it. You probably have to do a lot of negotiating to figure out how it should best be stored. I mean, usually salespeople have already been using a CRM for years. CSMs are using CRM or some sort of a kind of repository for customer data. I think you need to get the executives, and this is where the VP or the lead of customer success needs to take charge.
Yep.
And say, if we really want to hit our corporate goals, we need a fully engaged and fully enabled customer success practice. And for that to happen, we need data. We need access to data in a big way. And these are the inhibitors. And so if you can identify the inhibitors, then you might be able to kind of get agreement on some sort of a task force that's actually going to be technical that can kind of create those integrations. I mean, there's solutions on the market you kind of bring in, and they can do, with their services people, and pull it all together. And we know that's true, that happens. But if that's not an option for you and you want to do it in-house, there's ways to do that. You just have to identify what data you need, and not too much of it. I would recommend not too much of it. You just need enough to start with. And you might be surprised actually at what kind of insights you can glean from less is more than an excess of data. So
yeah.
So I know I didn't answer the question specifically because I don't think there is a right answer to that question.
No, I was going to say, I think that's the key, right? It's not necessarily like all your data needs to live in XYZ system, right? Like that's not the point. The system kind of doesn't matter in some sense, right? It matters that it lives somewhere and everybody knows where it lives. That's right. And everybody knows how to access it, and everybody knows how to, update it or change it if it needs it. And
that's right. And that last part is key. Like, who's updating it, and is that the responsibility? Is that the right place for the responsibility, or should it be somewhere else? And so those conversations need to be had, and I would recommend not waiting to do those, or just go at it and start getting people organized.
Yes, agreed. So before we move on to talk about cultural challenges, I have one last question for you about these organizational challenges, interdepartmental situations, right? What do you think happens if nothing changes? Like, what happens if,
if the status quo,
these conversations?
Yeah, if the status quo just keeps going on.
Yeah.
Unless unless your company is like, has so much money, it doesn't really care. What's going to happen is you probably start losing customers. Your retention rate will either not move into better territory, or it'll actually start eroding. And that's probably the first indicator, is that customers will start bleeding off and churning. And you'll never really understand why, because you're not doing a good job of really getting the data and getting the good picture of why they're upset or why they chose not to renew with you, even though they say verbally, we like you, the other stuff's not happening. And so if the coordination, the orchestration of customer success doesn't take place with the information they need and the actions they need from other organizations, if that doesn't programmatically get established and develop a good rhythm, I would just predict over time your company will not exist. And that's not hyperbole, I don't think. The way the market's going right now, especially with smaller companies, that's exciting space to be in, but it's also a really terrifying space to be in, because they can get disrupted and kind of either acquired or eliminated relatively quickly compared to like an Oracle. We are transforming, but we're not complacent about it either. We know we have to transform, because if we're not, then we're like a lot of large vendors that are at risk of losing our customer base to smaller, more nimble companies and all that kind of stuff. So I think, we've worked hard at establishing those connections to allow us to orchestrate a service. But it's, we had to kind of get over that all that stuff I talked about, those conversations, those negotiations to get the executives to agree. But we're in a good place now. But if we didn't, I'd say all bets are off. Who knows? I mean, you can't bet against anything anymore.
That's true. Who could have predicted 2020? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. So I want to shift to the sort of the second part of our conversation and talk about those cultural challenges, sort of internal to customer success organizations themselves, that they really need to overcome in order to start making progress on internal initiatives. So did you have a slide you want to share for this one too?
I did. I hope I can find it.
Perfect. You're good. No
yeah, here we go. Okay, so you can see my screen.
Yes, sure can.
And so, I'll just build this out again. But the second category is cultural. And this one's easy for me just to describe it. I'm just going to say it boils down to fear, uncertainty, and insufficient leadership. And so I think the balance of our conversation could be about how I view the cultural changes, the cultural challenges for customer success are all internal. It's all internal to the organization. We can talk about the company's culture. That's one thing. Of course, it has to kind of be complementary to that. But ultimately, customer success should own its own culture. And there are ways to identify what the weaknesses are and to work at improving those things. And so I boil it down to, generally, it's usually this fear of the people to change. They might not express it that way, but it ultimately boils down to that. They like what they're doing. And we can talk more about that. And then there's the uncertainty factor. The future is always kind of scary, right? And really, at the end of the day, leaders have to be leaders and step up and really do a better job of making sure that the culture is such that it actually is a powerful force versus something that's preventing customer success from succeeding.
Yes. And, I think it's important to recognize it's natural to be afraid of change, right?
Sure.
It's human nature. It's scary. We don't necessarily like the unknown as, human beings,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's impossible, right? So you have to consciously work through those things. So can you talk about, sort of a layer deeper below that fear, that uncertainty? What are some of the more specific cultural challenges, that you think kind of get in the way of progress?
Sure. The way I see it is usually the most common thing is established processes that have been in place for a while. They're perceived as getting the job done, or doing it good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, the established processes, what I would say is kind of a warning sign to people is how much of the established processes are being overlaid by people realizing they need to manually inject themselves in the process to kind of get it over a certain hurdle. And before long, you have these kinds of kind of complicated process when it initially was kind of clean, then it becomes kind of overly kind of involved. And the trouble there is that then that whole weird stuff around tribal knowledge kicks in, where people understand how it operates. They've not done a great job of documenting it. And so if they go on vacation or leave for whatever reason, it's really a challenge for companies to kind of figure all that out, untangle it. So I would say, kind of the quick, for me, the obvious thing is like conventional approaches can be a cultural challenge, even though it might be seen as, well, we get the job done. Well, maybe not good enough anymore because things are changing pretty quickly. Tradition, which is kind of related to that, but tradition is more like we have a traditional kind of culture. We support each other. I would say leaders should always be looking at what does it mean when people feel that way. Tradition is good, but it can be kind of an inhibitor too. And this is a huge one, an inability to look outside the company. So this is why I respect, actually, one of the big things I respect about the customer success community is there seems to be kind of a real attachment to the external. And that's wonderful. People are thirsty for information. And it's not just about, well, we're starting something new. I think they like the enthusiasm. I think they like the community sharing information. It's an exciting field, a profession. I call it a profession to be in. But there's a lot of companies, a lot of CSMs who don't behave that way. And I think that's a little risky, especially for the leaders. If they're not looking outside all the time, tapping into the community, tapping into what's happening in the industry, they run the risk of being hit by a truck at some point because they're just running their job, running their company, running their organization, and not realizing everything's changing. And you have to kind of be aware of those things to know when to pull stuff in, ideas in, or actually tools or something else. And then a couple more would be, I would say, communication challenges. If the leaders are not really great, I keep hammering on leaders because for me, a lot of it boils down to leadership. Yeah. If the leaders are not great at communicating the strategy and what it means to the individual contributors and the aspects of the service model that they're meant to execute, that's really leaving it too wide open for interpretation and misinterpretation. And finally, I would say what true collaboration is. So a cultural challenge is when true collaboration isn't happening. If it's forced collaboration or there's a kind of an adversarial sense of collaboration, that's not going to work. There's got to be kind of an authentic, genuine desire to want to collaborate. I don't mean just within the CSM teams. I'm talking about with peer organizations as well.
Yeah, I think your point about true collaboration is really interesting. We actually just published a white paper recently about the difference between cooperation and collaboration.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
I think cooperation is kind of like your point of sort of artificial collaboration. Like, yeah, we're working together, but we're really just each still trying to accomplish our own goals.
Yeah.
We'll sort of help each other to do that, but like it's more about like us versus.
Yeah, and eventually that falls apart, right? I mean, the goals aren't achieved. Someone's not going to be happy. Usually it's an executive is wondering, well, why didn't that work?
Right.
Yeah.
And that true collaboration, to your point, is actually working together to accomplish a common goal, right? Exactly. So that's just another way to look at that concept. It's really, really interesting. And then, okay, back to your point about leaders. I want to break down sort of some different layers of different roles and different specific behaviors or qualities that you think the different roles in a CS organization, could or should have to help with these scenarios. So let's start with leaders like frontline managers, that kind of role.
Yeah, I'm glad you said frontline managers because oftentimes when we say leaders, we just think of the senior leaders, and all these things I'm about to say apply, of course, to them. But let's think about the frontline managers who I once had when I first became a manager many years ago. My VP said to me, congratulations, you've got the hardest job in the entire company right now. And I really believe that. And it's not just because you get the from above and from below. It's actually very challenging to have the right attitude consistently to be able to kind of help your individual contributors on the team understand how to incorporate corporate strategy to their role, to make it, to want to live it, to be excited about it. So it requires the leaders, the managers, to be courageous, because sometimes those conversations are a little uncomfortable, to help to coach people along. It can be challenging, or it can be wonderful, but it's a whole variety of things. And so I would say leaders need to be kind of courageous within one-on-one meetings, but also within meetings with other teams, bigger meetings. I think they need to step up, be a little more visible in terms of being a leader. So being unafraid to kind of vocalize ideas, even if the ideas might be a little controversial, but if you believe in them, there's no reason why you shouldn't put it on the table if it's appropriate. And especially, I think, around written communications, I think there's, and I see this a lot, is that leaders are too often too fast at sending something off. I think they feel like, well, these people know me. It's okay. I don't have to be so, warm. But I think you should always take a pause and try to understand, how's that going to be read on the other side? Because it varies from person to person. Some people have a little bit thinner shell than others. And so I think you need to kind of play to the lowest common denominator, which is someone could be could be sensitive about how that is, the tone can be seen. And so you just need to kind of get into a good discipline around crafting your messages very kind of professionally and with personality too. I think that's important. And finally, I think these things all together, if you kind of get good at things I just talked about, demonstrating leadership in meetings, being kind of courageous, like I talk about in conversation, the respectful communication styles, I think that lends itself to creating an environment which fosters collaboration, which ultimately is what you really are trying to achieve in customer success, is this ability to kind of make people feel comfortable and excited, actually, and inspired to want to be part of this ongoing kind of refinement of the service, because if they're talking to customers all the time, they probably have a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe they're holding them to themselves because you've created this environment where you're closed off. You're walled off. You're not making yourself available. So it's a tough job. Being a manager is a really tough job, but there's a lot of rewards to it, because if you can mainline that executive strategy and kind of straight down to what it means for the frontline contributors, that's very powerful, and that's where you should get excited if you're a manager. Like, I did a really good job, and I can say this because not just because I read that. And I've talked to people. I've actually lived that. I've had VPs say to me, "Well, you're doing a really great job of, articulating in your own kind of way with your team what you've heard at, big all hands or kickoffs and all that kind of stuff." And it requires you to be a bit of a student of business.
Yeah.
And really, maybe it sounds a little corny, but just get excited about the job.
It does. So, okay, that's frontline managers and, higher than that too, sort of heads of CS organizations. How about all the way at the top? What can the C-suite do in this scenario to help?
Yeah, I would say the C-suite. Let's talk about the C-suite. We're not talking necessarily about VP of customer success, but they're usually that person's boss.
Yep.
I would say they can do much more. And what I mean by that is I don't mean for them to be the defenders or the evangelists for customer success. That's not their job. Their job is to run the company. But I think they need to examine their language when they say things like, "We are customer focused, we are a customer centric company." They should examine and be honest with themselves. What do I actually mean by that? And to actually believe that, because I would say more often than not, the company's not really functioning that way. Mm-hmm. There are some, I can think of, Jeff Bezos and not his thing this week, occupying the space. But actually his annual letter to the shareholders is just a classic kind of business case for how you should actually talk to the people who are actually helping to fund your business. Why he says it in such a genuine way, right? He's able to connect me as an Amazon purchaser, my needs, and his company's ability to kind of almost anticipate my needs. And if you've not read these letters, they're on the internet. You can find them. Just wonderful kind of like descriptions of how powerful it is in his mind for the company to be truly customer centric. And if you're an Amazon customer, it's hard to argue that they're not, because it feels like they are. So I think we should all kind of aspire that way to that. And C-level executives should be asking themselves, are all my lieutenants, are they actually running their organizations in such a way that if I were to ask an end customer, what's your perception of that service or this sales team? What's your perception of our sales approach? I mean, if I'm a CEO, I would be asking those questions of real customers. And so I think C-level executives, they have a big, huge role here. And it's all about making sure that the company is actually behaving customer centric when they say they are.
Yes, so important. I need to go read those letters now. I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
Okay, so last but not least, the third sort of category of role I want to talk about is the CSMs, those individual contributors. What can they do to contribute to better cross-organizational collaboration? Are there skills they should be trying to up-level in? What should they be doing?
Yeah, there are. And it is important that they understand that they should not leave this job to their managers or to their strategy team, which I'm a part of, necessarily. I mean, that's what we focus on. And they shouldn't just leave it to the executives to do this. They should also be wanting to get good at driving the ability for other organizations to work well with us in customer success, to explain why our ability to orchestrate on behalf of the customer is so critical, not just to the customer, but for us, the company. And so I think the skills that they should really hone are really around patience, strength, and fortitude, because it takes time to wear down barriers, internal barriers. It's talked about a lot, silos and barriers, but there are ways to kind of melt these things and kind of eliminate them. And it just takes time, a lot of patience, a lot of discussion, a lot of consistency. But some other things that might help would be adopting some marketing strategies. And what I mean by that is marketing has been for like 100 years good at kind of messaging, right? And so I think you need to figure out, how can I get good at crafting messages that are succinct, personable, kind of a little bit unique, will hit home to something that matters to the audience. That kind of stuff, those tactics are really valuable to incorporate as an individual in the way I communicate with other organizations. I talked a bit before about communications and respect. That goes a long way to, again, kind of eroding walls, is by reaching out as peers. Don't be subservient. Customer success, please do not be subservient. You are a peer organization, behave as a peer.
Yeah.
With confidence. You've got a lot to offer. I mentioned it already a number of times, but you have this kind of customer intel. Use that in stories. Talk about stories of your customers and how, if only you had better kind of more consistent kind of information flow, the stories would be more plentiful, and that would benefit the company. And then I would say, finally, I would say get excited about data and data analytics. It's not just about the data, of course, it's about getting the insights from the data. You talk to customers all the time. Understand how to kind of, pick the pieces apart that match, and that you can kind of correlate into kind of, I keep saying the word story, but it makes sense for me. Insights are great, but they're better if they're part of a story. And so I would say CSMs can do a lot on their own,
Yeah, that is a lot. It's a lot of things, right? I think, like you said, it can sometimes feel like, oh, it's the manager or director or VP's job, and it is their job, right? But it's not their job alone. right? It's everyone in, everyone all together. So I think that's so true. Okay, before we open it up for some audience questions, what else should we talk about?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess I want to close with one more slide, Marley. Just a number of bullet points I want people to kind of take away.
Yeah. And while Peter's pulling that up, audience members, if you have any more questions you'd like him to answer, please pop them in the Q&A pop-up right now.
Okay. So I've got a number of what I call considerations and implications. And the first one would be, just be honest about what you need. And what I mean by that is if you're running a service, customer success service, really understand what is required for you to actually deliver that service. There's usually a bunch of elements. So make sure you have a good grasp of that. And that's the first step towards really improving. Understand that the other teams might not believe they need you as much as you need them. And that's fair. And maybe that's true. But that shouldn't negate the need for you to educate them about what customer success is. And remember, go back to what I said at the very beginning. Don't let someone else define what customer success is. It's your organization, your mission. You got to believe in it and make sure that it's defined, and don't let someone else kind of like blur that definition, because then that's the road to kind of like danger. Goals are only dreams if you can't get the help you require from others. In other words, you can have your mission, you can have your execution, your model, all you want, and you really believe in those goals. But if some elements of that service require some work from other teams, they'll never get accomplished. So just remember that. It takes more than the establishment of a process for real change to happen. It actually has to occur in people's heads too, right? They have to really believe in what the outcomes are going to be, so that they can not just establish the process, but execute the process and measure the accomplishment of the results, and then make some refinement. I said this once in the presentation, but leaders need to lead. And this could be another topic altogether. I'm actually in the process right now of designing leadership training, because leading today is different than it was 10 years ago. And we want our leaders to be really smart business people who have a lot of empathy and concern, a lot of intelligence. This, it's a tough job, but I think the right kind of people get excited by that. The last thing we talked about was the individual contributors, and there's a huge role for CSMs to play in this ability to kind of manage change. And so don't just leave it to your bosses and their service designers. Finally, customer success, I've written blog posts about this, I've spoken at conferences on this very topic. It's about driving transformation. And really, at the end of the day, you got to get really comfortable with change. It's here, it's not going to go away. Because you're comfortable in your job the way it's run now, don't expect it to be the same 9-12 months from now. So that's what I would just kind of leave everyone with. Amen
to that. With that, we have a bunch of really fantastic questions from our audience. So I will read a few of them to you. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sort of the relationship between customer success and revenue, right? And that renewals conversation. So this person would like to know, would it be fair to hold customer success alone responsible for non-renewal, or should it be viewed as a company issue?
I think that's a great question, because it calls into play what are the factors of the renewal. And so my short answer is no. I don't think customer success should be solely responsible for a non-renewal, nor should they take all the credit for a renewal, I would say, because there's other things that happen. Support can get credit. I mean, at least some kind of credit, and maybe not a monetary credit, but at least some credit for the work they do. And I think you just need to be honest as executives. What are the pieces that have to come together to drive renewals? And let's applaud these people. And in the case of customer success, if they've said they're going to own it, let's compensate them accordingly. But if it fails for whatever reason, it'll be factored into their performance. I mean, maybe not individual performance, but maybe a team performance in some form or fashion. But then we can't just say they're 100% responsible, because there's too many other players in the picture for the company, for the customer. And the customer may have decided not to renew, not because of the service. And maybe the product was okay, but maybe there's something going on with the executive team looking elsewhere for solutions. And so it's no one's fault, really. And so I don't think CSM should take the blame for that.
Agreed. All right, I like this one too. Again, talking about, interdepartmental communication, breaking down those silos. How would you recommend handling a product or engineering leader who doesn't really seem very customer focused and is very focused on being a product-led company?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think in those kinds of cases, you have to come with examples and maybe some stories of customers who are making with feedback, maybe some customer feedback in the form of a story. And usually, like the way we run our VOC, we create these stories. They're not fictional stories, they're real stories, but they're based on feedback from customers, and we interpret them into kind of something that's really consumable by the executive, so they understand, they have an appreciation. We might weigh in some research from outside, from different research bodies, to kind of support a point of view. We're providing a point of view. And I would say, if you're really trying to convince or persuade a head of engineering that they need to think a little differently, that's really more of a leadership kind of conversation, I would say. They're not going to really entertain that conversation or idea from individual contributors or even managers. So it's got to be more of a senior level responsibility, but it can be done. I think it would take time, and it would take information and evidence. I would say
back to the data conversation.
Data, and also I think this person's they're out of touch in a sense from the way the industry is working. And at some point you might want to weigh in, or the leader might want to weigh in and say, well, this is from McKinsey or the Boston Consulting Group. They're saying this. What are your thoughts? Have a conversation. What are your thoughts on this?
What do you think?
Yeah. Are they wrong?
I love that. I love that approach. All right, this one's really interesting. Do you think there is a space for both CSMs and account managers?
Well, only in a sense, I'm a fan of account managers. No, I guess I was thinking of account managers as salespeople, but I think the question is, in the same account, is there space for a CSM and an account manager? I would say if it's a large enough account, yes. Then I think the account manager should just take responsibility for the whole relationship, because they're probably more senior. If it's a large account, again, because they probably have relationships with executives, by all means, you should support that. And the CSM would have a role to play and you can have it be a very strategic role, even if it's a single product you're supporting and a subset of the actual customer environment. I think you can really bring a lot to bear to make that account manager successful, and try to make that a partnership. But I don't think at this point in our evolution, CSMs would supplant an account manager. I think there is definitely still a need for strong account management, depending on the size of the account.
Agreed. All right, we have time for one final question. Let's see. So in the early stages of implementing customer success, it seems easier to start implementation with brand new customers with onboarding, right? But how would you go about implementing it with existing customers in a way that's not disruptive?
Planning. I think you have to have some really honest conversations about their priorities, their skills. Their existing processes. This really needs to be kind of fleshed out. That's the only way I think to kind of move that forward. And there might be some sort of kind of resistance on the customer side, because they probably feel they know it all. And I think you just need some, smart people to come in, on you or others, to come in and have this really great conversation with them and say, listen, we're trying to reach our kind of mutually great objectives here. And these are the objectives we'd like. We think yours are these, are they the right ones? And have that kind of more consultative kind of conversation and start listing what needs to happen. And I think if you engage properly, I think that'll kind of, they'll warm up to that.
Agreed. I think just being really open about it.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, we have come to the top of the hour. I want to thank you again very much for joining us. I know it flew by, right?
Thank you, Marley. I really appreciated it. It was fun.
Absolutely. It was fun. Reminder to everyone, you'll receive this recording within 24 hours. Thanks, and see you at our next session next month.
Bye, everybody.